Well, hey there, and welcome to episode number 128 of Groove, the No Treble podcast, which you can always find at notreble.com. My name is Mitch Joel. Let's get on with the show. So, who are you and what do you do?
My name is Eric Bass. I am the bass player and producer for the rock band Shinedown, and also composer of things.
Well, great to connect and great to meet you.
Yeah, great to meet you as well, man.
It's terrible that your name is both spelt the right way, but we say it the fish way. Like, how, yeah. Eric?
I know. I've often wondered if it's the most awesome or most terrible thing ever for a bass player. But yeah, I just embrace it, man. I lean into it. Some people think I made it up. I think that's funny, 'cause I'm not much on stage names, but I'll let the myth grow if it needs to, I guess.
I think you could just legally pronounce it as bass and be done with
it.
Sure.
I don't really correct people when they, it's if they ask, I just say, like the beer, like the fish, but.
I was going to say, it seems like you're busy, but I feel like you're always busy. And maybe it's just amplified by the fact that you have the solo album, I Had a Name, out at the same time as there's two singles and you're touring and there's a potentially new Shinedown album coming. You're producing, you're writing the songs. I'm just trying to figure out at your mid-age as I am, how that's feeling and how that's working out for you.
I'm sort of busy in spurts, if that makes sense. Like I'll be really, really, really busy for 2 or 3 months, and then I can kind of decompress. And it's not something I do intentionally. It just kind of works out that way. When I'm working on a record, it's very intense and it's every day and it's pulling my hair out and self-doubt and all those things. And then, usually I'll get a month reprieve or something, or a couple of weeks reprieve, and then we'll go on tour. And, and then that's locked down pretty hard for like we are right now. It's go, go, go. I really don't, I can't really cross-pollinate the two. Like the creative and the touring for me have always been really separate. I have a hard time being creative on tour. So, so when I'm out here, I just kind of put that stuff to bed for a second, and not that I don't have ideas, or just, if I'm writing a book, or if I'm writing if a lyric idea comes up, it's not like you can't do something about it. You have to. But in earnest, working on things, I kind of just shift over to this, and this kind of, believe it or not, sort of frees up my brain space, and is actually more like a vacation in a way. Like when I'm home, things are very intense, and so yeah, man, I just kind of it kind of unintentionally gets compartmentalized like that. And touring can seem like I'm busy, because you're on tour, but I'm really not busy on tour. Like it's a lot of boredom, a lot of downtime. So.
Yeah, as someone who speaks professionally for a living, I give keynote addresses. Yep. The only difference is that you're not in a band scenario. You're actually literally alone and on your own. And I tell people all the time, it's, you're not paying me for the hour on stage. You're paying me for everything else, because
you're right.
It's just so different. And you are, even though you can work, we all have laptops and we can do things. Mm-hmm. I agree. Like maybe we're similar in that way. Like I don't have that same headspace as when I'm in my studio or my space and I can do stuff.
Yeah, work for me is very intimate and intense, and so I have to be able to plug into it in a certain way. And I don't mean to sound woo-woo about it or anything, man, but that's just how it is. I have to, I have to feel like I can dedicate 100% of myself to whatever I'm working on, and it can only be one thing at a time. By the way, it's not like I can do. I've studied Winston Churchill over the years, and his prodigious ability to do 1,000 things at once and do them well, and found a way to. I longed to be that person, and I just can't be. I have to be like, if I'm working on a song that day, I'm working on that song, and if I'm working on a video edit that day, I'm working on that video edit, and it's going to take me hours, and it's just what it's going to be. So I have to be able to turn that ignition and turn that part of my brain on and just get focused, because out here, and I've tried it. And not that I haven't brought Pro Tools out here and worked on music, and some of my solo record was worked on out on tour. Right. But the problem with that is that, whatever is part of my brain chemistry or my makeup, I cannot stand getting pulled away from something that I'm working on. And so what happens out here is I'll be deep in work, and then it's like, hey, we got an hour before we have to go on stage. And it's just, the mental gymnastics that I have to do to pull out of that, switch everything around, and get into, oh, now I have to be this other guy, is it's actually like, it causes like a physical, visceral reaction in my body in a way. And so I've just found it healthier to just go, you know what, like this is a vacation from the intense work, and then when I go home, that's when the intense work starts. Um, and the problem, and not a problem, but the situation that happens then is I have no way to get away from the intense work if I need to, because I can't shut it off. And so sometimes I can kind of snowball and spiral a bit, but tour always seems to, as much as and here's the thing, as much as I don't like when I'm in the intense work at home and I have to go on tour, it's like, it's kind of the same thing, getting pulled away from it. And I'm salty about getting pulled away from the work. But then when I get out here, it actually lightens my mood and lightens my headspace a good bit. So it's just really two completely separate things. It would probably be different if the band liked to work on music on tour, but no one in the band likes working on music on tour. This is just something that we treat completely separately.
So what's interesting is I'm hearing you talk a lot actually about constraints, which is super interesting when it comes to creativity.
Yeah.
Time is a constraint. Location is a constraint. Our mental chemistry, where we're at in the world, is a constraint. Timelines, all constraints. It's interesting to hear you talk about it, but dance around the idea that clearly there's something, it sounds like, at least from you, that when the timeline compresses or expands, that's when it seems like you're saying you feel more free or more connected to the work.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. It's something that people don't think about an awful lot. Yeah, thinking about the boundaries that you probably, that all creatives should probably set for themselves if they don't have them naturally, to be able to complete work or work on something efficiently. Open-ended deadlines is a horrible thing, right? in creative work, it's awful. And that is actually one thing that, because of Shinedown, one thing we're afforded, so to speak, I mean, is sort of an open-ended timeline for creativity. And I mean, not that there aren't people asking about when's the record coming, but we don't have an A&R person anymore. Like we are our own A&R. We go and write our songs. We decide what they're going to be. We decide what's going on the record. Of course, the label hears it, and hopefully we're not turning in awful things, but not that we don't write awful things. We do, and no one ever hears it. But it can become a bit of an albatross in a way, having that it just happened. The two songs that we have out now, 365 and Dance Kid Dance, were, I was kind of put under the gun to finish those pretty quickly, when I wasn't prepared to finish them quickly. And as much as I griped and moaned about it, it's probably a good thing. Interestingly enough, the Dance Kid Dance mix is not my best work. Like, I'm not really super proud of it. It sounds okay, it's not awful, but it's not what I envisioned, but it had to get done. And at the end of the day, we also say, the kids don't care. At the end of the day, they just want to dance and have fun and do their thing, So
I heard a great line. What is it? Mixing is the death of hope. Is that the line?
You're so right. And all of my hope is wrapped up in mixing. So that'll tell you where my brain is. For me, like, that's the thing I take the most pride in, probably, out of everything besides songwriting, but with the technical side of things, mixing is my favorite thing. And it's kind of the thing. It's the there are these wizards in our business that are just great at it, and so you sort of hold yourself up against their work. And so when you have to put something out in the world that's not, that you don't feel great about, it's not the best feeling. But again, I would probably still be working on that mix if you have
hope, Eric. You have too much hope.
yeah, I'd still be working on it. So what, to bring it back around, I think, to what you were saying is having to get up and leave the work, puts these brackets on the work. It's like you can't, and so therefore, in the end, ultimately, even though it seems like a detriment in the short term, I think in the long term, it's for me, it's probably a great benefit to have to walk away from it and come back.
So let's talk bass, Bass. I might just play on that
man.
Just because I'm here. We got to. You have such an interest. Like, I love doing this podcast. It's been 10 plus years that I speak to to bass players.
Yeah.
Bass players are such unique characters. It's like if they feel they're not spinning it off like Jaco Pastorius, that they're somehow holding back or not, or if they came from guitar to the instrument, it's like, oh, I stepped, down, not into an
Right.
instrument.
Yeah.
I've been following the band obviously forever. Love the work that you do. And it's so interesting because it is who you are, but it's not necessarily what you are because of the work you do. I mean, for those who don't know, on the solo album, it's 100% you. Every single instrument, all the production, all the songwriting, all the singing. In Shinedown, since you joined, you've taken on huge roles and responsibilities beyond just laying it down.
Right.
I know that from your childhood, you had a musical family. So talk a little bit about those early days, because it seems like you were exposed to every single instrument, and yet you did somehow push into the bass.
Yeah. So my early childhood was all music from the time I can remember. My mother had music in the house. My grandparents had music in the house constantly. My grandfather was a professional trombone player in the 40s, played with Benny Goodman and the Dorseys and all of this stuff. And then my mother started a professional music career that she ended up abandoning because she met my father, who was in the Navy. But we always had, there was always, church music was a big thing in my house when I was a kid. Musicals was a big thing in my house when I was a kid. Lots of Rodgers and Hammerstein and Broadway stuff as well. Lots of that stuff, Seven Brides for Seven Brothers and Mary Poppins and anything with music in it was around, but not really rock music that much. And I sort of, like a lot of kids, and hopefully this continues to this day, you discover that stuff kind of on your own or through your friends, and then it's something dangerous and you're not supposed to be doing it, not necessarily. And in my house, that was sort of amplified at one point. It didn't last forever, but at one point, my dad didn't want rock music really in the house. And then also on Sundays, the only thing we could listen to was either classical music or church music.
Wow.
So there's like these parameters, but again, boundaries put on it, right?
Constraints.
Constraints put on it. And so those constraints caused me to dig into sort of the secret side of rock music. And I had some friends in the neighborhood when I was super young, like 7 or 8, 9 years old, somewhere in there, that one kid had the Kiss solo records, and there was a Quiet Riot 45 in there somewhere that I ended up with, and hid him in the top of my closet. He gave me this Gene Simmons solo record, and I hid him in the top of my closet. My dad found him and threw him out, But that being said, and now that I'm thinking about it, though, I do need to digress a bit, because there was a point, I had my mom's records when I was a kid too. So it was like Beach Boys, Beatles, Elton John, like these 45s of Help. I remember the Help 45, Beatles, Help. I remember the Crocodile Rock, Elderberry Wine was on the B side of that Elton John 45 that I would wear out. Man, I loved, I loved that stuff. So there was some of that, but I guess it was like sort of mom approved stuff, But yeah, man, and so I started, I remember, finding my first guitar in the house. My mom had a couple of guitars that she just kept in a closet. They were just in cases, and I found one of them was a Harmony tenor guitar, which only has the top 4 strings, the 4 highest strings on it. And I remember picking out melodies on that, no chords, but like just hearing melodies and just trying to pick them out. And then eventually that led to chords, in which on a 4-string guitar is a lot easier than a 6-string, right? I'm just playing the top 4 strings. So the hardest thing was going to be a D chord,
Right.
And then, but like an E chord was, one finger, so it was super easy. And I took piano lessons, and I hated piano for a long time. And then, at some point I asked for an electric guitar for Christmas, and I got it. And I'm very blessed that my mom, from her former music career, had a 1969 Fender Bassman 100 amp in cabinet.
Oh, wow.
Which is this huge thing
Yeah.
especially when you're a kid. It's like mountainous. And I remember plugging into it and hitting the guitar, and there was no distortion. And I couldn't figure out why there was no distortion. Like all these guitars that I like have this distortion sound, but this guitar is broken or something. It doesn't do the right thing. And then my uncle, who knew my mom's brother, who knew her thing or two, he's like, oh, you need a fuzz box, distortion pedal. So I asked for one of those, and I got that. And then I couldn't figure out how to plug it in. I remember plugging the distortion pedal into one side of the amp and the guitar into the other, and I couldn't, again, trying to figure it all out. Eventually I got it figured out, and it was like, oh, there's that sound I love, And so I think the first thing I ever learned how to really play on the electric guitar was, at the time, was I was probably 13 at this point, maybe 14 years old. That's a little late, maybe 12. I don't know. But it was Sam Kinison had that version of Wild Thing that he had put out, right?
Yeah.
And I learned that, like I learned those power chords, man, and that was awesome. So and so fast forward some, I eventually decided that I wanted to be a shredder. I really got into guitar players like Steve Vai and Malmsteen and Satriani. Yeah, sure, dude. Like all, I had Surfing with the Alien, and tried my best to learn these things. I wasn't very good at it, but one thing I did like doing was writing my own guitar compositions. So that's where the bass came in. I realized that if I was going to I started making these recordings in my bedroom, and I thought at the time that I had invented 4-track recording, like multi-track recording. Because
I was going to say, do you have like a Fostex? What did you have?
No, I got my sister's. I realized I could record my guitar into my stereo, right? I could just DI out of it or whatever into my stereo, and then I realized, well, if I can play that one back into my sister's stereo, and I can record into that one at the same time. and so I had 3 sisters, so there were 4 stereos, and I just set them all up in my room in a circle, and I would just go around the room, and I thought this was something that I had figured out, and then my mom's like, no, they make something that does this, Yeah. And so I got a Yamaha MT100 4-track recorder, sure. but and I asked for a little drum machine, and so I would make these guitar recordings, and that's what the bass was about for me, and it continues to be to this day. In fact, I would say all instruments to me. I think something that happened to me was I was never a master of any instrument, right? I was just kind of jack of all trades with instruments. It was just sort of, if it was a mandolin, I could figure it out. If it was a banjo, I could figure it out. If it was a trombone, I could figure it out. If it was a piano, I could figure it out. If whatever the thing was that was making noise, I just wanted to be able to play it well enough to be able to make the recording I wanted to make, and then I probably wouldn't touch it again until I needed it again. And so instruments became something that I used to make compositions rather than trying to be this great instrumentalist. I wanted to be a great instrumentalist, but I kind of realized it's like I don't have the either mental or physical ability to be a Steve Vai or to be a shredder of any kind, which is great for somebody who ends up on bass, let me tell you. So,
well, I mean, at the time we did have Billy Sheehan, we had Stu Hamm going at the same time. There were some beasts then too.
Ridiculous, man. I had like Stu Hamm's solo record.
So like,
good. What is this wizardry, right?
With the X Factor, the X Factor bass with the hip shot. Yeah, so
crazy
cool.
Little bass that he played, right?
So cool.
And of course Sheehan, because Mr. Big and David Lee Roth and Vai and all that stuff. I was a big Sheehan fan, man. So bass just kind of came into my life at that point, and it's kind of come and gone. It did come and go throughout my career. Eventually, I taught myself how to play piano again because I'd thrown off piano lessons, couldn't stand them, and then at some point, like 2000, right around 2000, I realized like I really want to actually know how to play this instrument. So I bought. I had a bunch of Ben Folds records, and I just sat down and started learning Ben Folds songs to the best of my ability. Again, he's a piano shredder. I'm not a piano shredder either, but just kind of getting the basic feel of everything down. And he's also a great one for drums too, because Ben Folds, a lot of people don't know, he's a great drummer. And on a lot of his solo records, he played the drums, and so just his feel and groove I always liked a lot. And so, so when it came to drum stuff too, he was somebody that I sort of gravitated toward as well. But that's kind of been the story. And then I at some point gave up on my toured in vans and trailers and did the regional touring thing that a lot of musicians do, and national touring, and starving to death and making not so great records with not so great bands. And the course of the time, you think it's the best thing ever, and you don't understand why no one has signed you yet, but and that's not a slight at those bands. I mean, they were fun and it was great and it was formative for sure. But you know, at some point I gave all that up to become a record producer and engineer and songwriter, and that led me to writing with Brent for the Sound of Madness record for Shinedown, and we hit it off, and there was some doubt. I was asked about the bass player position kind of early on in that relationship, and I wasn't sure I wanted to do it because there were a lot of drug problems in the band, and I just built this studio and had a second mortgage out on my house that my wife and I had taken out to build this place, and like, you know, all this investment, and I kind of decided what my career was going to be in music, but you know, some things cleared out around that situation. There was some cleaning up that was done of some of the issues, and so when that opportunity came up again, I was asked about it a second time, and they were like, "But you know, we also need a guitar player." So it's like, so I went and auditioned both. I did both things, and but the thing is it caused me to really get my bass chops up because I wasn't playing bass every day. I was playing guitar more than I was playing bass at the time, and the bass, you know, it really, I'd never really thought about it ever being a primary instrument for me. Again, it's just this thing that I use to compose music, and so that's really when my bass playing really started. You know, I was like, man, you better figure this out if you want an opportunity. So ended up that Zach had already kind of secured the guitar spot by the time I got there. I still played, you know, still did some songs on guitar and continue to in the band, to be honest with you. But sure. Yeah, man. And then just kind of took it from there, and have really, you know, never. The bass is, I guess, with what our band does, the bass is not the instrument for anybody who wants to, you know, look at me. It's not that kind of a thing. You know, I'm really like all about the song, and the band's all about songs. And so, you know, again, it's just something to get my ideas across, you know. And that's not a slight at the instrument or anything. It's just kind of how I look at a guitar the same way. I look at a piano the same way.
Yeah, and that's what actually made me supremely excited to speak to you, Eric, because a lot of times what happens is people step into that role, which isn't new. We've heard of this story consistently over time, but then they have a bit of imposter syndrome.
Yeah, of
where
course.
They're trying to figure out, like, how do I be the quote unquote bass player?
Yeah.
And what I find interesting in what you're saying, if I could paraphrase it, you can jump on it if I'm wrong, is you were thinking about it more like this is an opportunity to be a musician in this entity. It just so happens that I'm going to be playing bass. But at the same time, you also did say, like, I have to take this more seriously. So I'd be super curious if that's accurate. And then two, if it is, so what did you do to take it more seriously? Were you listening to other players? Were you like, I got to buy a bunch of basses and cool amps? Like, what were you thinking?
Yeah. Well, I did buy some basses. I bought, I bought, cause I had one at the time. I had one 4-string Sterling. That's what I had. I still got it to this day. Still got that same bass. So I ended up really liking I had a Stingray. I ended up buying Sterlings. I'm buying 2 Sterlings, which are still my main number 1 and number 2 basses that I still have now. And I've just recently come back to playing all Ernie Ball stuff. And Tim over at Ernie Ball, they built me. I took those original Sterlings, like they were, I don't know, probably 2007-ish, 2006-ish era Sterlings. And I gave them the serial number, and they built me like 5-6 more to that spec, which is amazing. So they've been really awesome, but I'm kind of back to that. But I had this thing when I first got in the band. It was kind of a joke. It was like lead bass. I'm going to play lead bass in the band, you know? And what that meant was, yeah, man, it is about 4 chords and a melody, and I'm holding down something, but it became about the show dynamic, like putting on a show. So rather than sitting here on my instrument and trying to be as notey as I can be to impress the tens of people who are going to care about that in the audience, it's like, I'm going to play these songs that we've worked on, but I'm going to, and the whole band does this, I would like to think, and give as dynamic a performance as I can. So it really just kind of became about coming to terms with the fact that I was in the entertainment business now, you know, rather than so much in the, you know, course it's the rock and roll business, of course it's the music business, but really taking on this role of being an entertainer on stage before I'm a musician on stage. So, and that's sort of a different hat, right? That's what I'm talking about, kind of the compartmentalizing being out here versus being in the studio. I'm a musician in the studio. Out here, I think about myself as being more of an entertainer, and the whole band does as well. And I love, like, the bass isn't glued to me when I'm on stage. Like, I sling it around and I'll hold it out, and I use a lot of we do a lot of jams in between songs, so we can get the crowd. Brent gets the crowd going, and he talks a lot, so we just make things up on stage, and it's different every night. We might have the same foundation for it, but we never know where it's going to go. So we're just sort of, it's great. It actually is. It maybe contradict myself. It is a great time to just be a musician on stage at that point. Like, none of us kind of know exactly where it's going to go. One of us can kind of throw a curveball in there at any time, but I'll use like a whammy pedal with an octave drop on it, and I'll play up on the higher strings, and like kind of just almost like a guitar player for a second, like I say, lead bass, it's like, but it gives me a chance to be a showman with the instrument rather than just here,
right.
And there's time and place for that. I do that, of course, you get in a groove and you're doing the thing. But
so when you were doing that, Eric, did it change the parts that you had to play that weren't your parts from the earlier stuff?
Yeah, well, the interesting thing, man, is I absorbed those things into my DNA. I really did. I had no choice, because I had no identity as a bass player. I had no, like, I didn't come in with a tone. I didn't come in with a sound. I didn't come in with anything. I came in with, like, and I still to this day just tell people, like, hey man, if something goes down with the rig, just throw me a DI and let it, and as long as it's making bass noises, I'll be fine.
Right.
Like, I'm not married to this identity of myself with the instrument, which sometimes I can be envious of. I mean, it's nice. I think it'd be really nice to have more of an identity as a player than I do, in that way. You look at like a Flea or a Tim Commerford or a Robert DeLeo or somebody like that.
Sure.
These guys have definite identities as players, that I probably don't have. But there's a benefit to that, though, because so the Sound of Madness record, even though I worked on some of the writing for it, I didn't record that record. Chris Chaney played on that record. And so I come into a situation where not only Brad Stewart, who was the former bass player of Shinedown, whose style I have to mimic, he played all with his fingers, right? Everything was fingers on the first two Shinedown records. There was no pick. To Chris Chaney, who's in an everything's pick on that record, and everything's aggressive downstroke, big aggressive sounds. And so it's like, well, I have to figure both of these things out, and it sticks to this day. To this day, I pick and choose what I'm going to play with my fingers, what I'm going to play with a pick. It's always back and forth. It's song dependent. And then some songs that in the studio, maybe I play with a pick, feel better with fingers live. Like Cut the Chord's one of those songs where I recorded it with a pick, but it feels much better live with my fingers. So I just absorbed as much of that stuff into my playing as I could. And I mean, what a blessing, right? What a cool thing to be able to do. It's just, I have to do this case study in Chris Chaney, who's one of the greatest, probably greatest players we have, right? And I mean, what a monster tone, and just the tone's here, right? Like, just a monster player, and so I have to, in my mind, I have to at least meet that level, if not try to exceed it to the best of my ability. And same thing with Brad. So, yeah, I just kind of became a sponge with that stuff, and it became part of my identity. And again, that's part of the lead bass thing, right? Was like, was that it was like, I did feel, especially that first record, when you're kind of the new, well, not kind of the new guy, you're the new guy, and you definitely want to make an impact. You don't want to just kind of come in with a whimper. You want people to be like, oh wow, this is different, and who is this guy? And so I decided to. And it wasn't it wasn't like I was stepping outside of myself to be a dynamic presence on stage. I'd done that in my other bands. Like, I was really all about the performance, but really kind of putting on this cloak of being an entertainer over being a musician, maybe became super important.
You mentioned Robert DeLeo from STP and Tim Commerford from Rage Against the Machine, also bass players that had a huge impact on me. But if I'm being honest, early to mid 90s is when they came out.
Yep.
And then I always reflect back on the fact that at that point, I'd been playing bass a lot longer because, unlike you, I was the guy who picked up the bass and then kind of stuck with it. I mean, I lost my way later on in life, but at that primal teenage want to be in a rock band, that was where it was. And once I picked up the bass, I started realizing that my influences on bass were actually quite different than my musical influences. Because, like you, it was Quiet Riot, Motley Crue, Kiss, Van Halen, and then whatever else was in the top 100 when it was the 80s and 90s or whatever it would have been. So it's interesting that as you came into the bass more professionally, your influences actually are out of what I would say would be the time in which typically your influences hit most, which is when you're young.
Yes.
So there's an interesting mix going on there with you.
Well, I think when you're young, it's everything is your mind is more simple. And so what you're paying attention to is what you're asked to pay attention to. So if you're listening to Van Halen, you're listening to the guitar player and David Lee Roth or Sammy Hagar, and that's what you're listening to. If you're, I play guitar to this day, probably electric guitar, probably because I heard "Talk Dirty to Me" by Poison on the radio.
Right,
and it's like, oh, that guitar riff, man. It's like that's what I'm being asked to listen to. But then as you gravitate toward bass and you get older, now you start paying attention to the relationship of the bass to those things that you're asked to pay attention to.
Yeah.
And you start realizing that, like, oh, underneath, and I mean, I know who, of course, I'm a fan of the band, so I know who Michael Anthony is, but do you really know who he is? Are you really listening to what he's doing? And, what can be seen as this like simple Neanderthal thing that's happening underneath Eddie's playing is actually the reason why Eddie can do what he does, and it's the reason why it works. And you start realizing that, or Robert DeLeo for that matter, the fact that if you take Robert DeLeo's bass lines out of any STP song, the guitar riff ceases to work. Like the guitar riff works, but it doesn't do the magical thing. Listen to Interstate Love Song. Like if you take the bass out of Interstate Love Song, all of a sudden there's no magic in that riff anymore, the way it was. And if we go to Timmy C as well, with Rage, it's like, the fact that he holds down that. I love that's why those two guys the three guys we're talking about, actually, Michael Anthony, Tim Commerford, and Robert DeLeo, are probably my three favorite bass players, and for all different reasons. But for Tim, it's like the fact that he's innovative on the instrument. First of all, he makes his own pedals, all those synthy bass sounds that he has that, you're kind of wondering, what is that? How does he get that? But the fact that he's just there to, in much the way that Michael Anthony is, he's holding everything down and he's kind of playing, he's keeping up with Tom Morello and allowing making Tom's riff sound bigger by doing the same thing he's doing is kind of the difference between he and Robert DeLeo, right? Robert DeLeo is just complementing something that his brother's doing. I try to take all of these things, all of these different things that I admire about these players and kind of incorporate them into what I do. It's like, I know my place. I know that I'm there to support the song. But what can the bass do to complement that as well, And so
it's interesting too. Like the thing I was thinking about when you were talking about those three players in particular was the same conversation I'll have with friends or sometimes on this show about John Entwistle and The Who. It's this idea that if you're a bass player, it's hard not to mention him.
Yeah.
And then when you do and you acknowledge it, you start realizing that in the cacophony of all things that are Pete Townsend, Keith Moon, and Roger Daltrey, you can be that prolific and still only be at that point the fourth. Zeppelin would be another example of that, I think, as well.
Who was that? The last person you said?
Led Zeppelin would be another example of that.
John Paul Jones, man. Yeah, it's bass player. I look at someone like John Paul Jones, and again, I am no John Paul Jones, man.
There's a similarity in terms of instrumentation and production. I mean,
yeah, I think that you talked about the personality of a bass player, and I think that this is gonna. Oh man, this might get me canceled. I better not make this analogy, but You know,
Dance around it.
No, bass players are like, you know, like girls that are 10s don't have to try that hard. You know, it's like, it's like girls that are 10s, you know, they're going to be fine, you know, because they don't have to dig in and they don't have to figure things out. Girls that are not 10s have to figure out how to do other things really well.
Yeah.
Right.
This is all of a sudden Geddy Lee's a 10 out of 10, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. So you have to, like, you know, I better bring something else to the table, right?
Yeah.
And it kind of maybe doesn't always manifest itself in this way. I mean, it's nothing's can't paint a broad stroke with it, but look at someone like Entwistle. He's like, watch this, you know, like I better do something. If I'm gonna stick out in the middle of all of this, like if you look at the Who, everyone's a lead player, right? Everybody, they're all playing lead instrument, you know, literally.
And like Hendrix had that, Cream had that too, like really similar.
Yeah, for sure. And you know, or you end up in a place like a John Paul Jones, you know, where it's like, okay, I might not be the most dynamic player on my instrument, but watch me do these 5 things, you know. And I just think you almost have to be a little extra, you know. And that's not always the case, man. Again, you look at Michael Anthony. Michael Anthony's just been, but look at his voice too. Though. That guy can, you know,
right, well,
take Michael Anthony's harmonies out of Van Halen. It's not Van Halen anymore, you know.
Yeah. I'm curious a bit about the balance between what the bass is today and then all of the other roles you encompass, in the sense of, I've been thinking a lot lately about just how music is very precise in the studio. There's this precision in terms of even getting past auto-tune to, you'll play a thing and you get a couple of the notes and you can tweak them faster, slower, right pitch, everything, to the fact where newer musicians sound like they're singing with auto-tune, even though they're not, just because their ear was trained on listening to that for so many years that they're there. And at the same time, you're in Shinedown, which is, you know, probably one of the biggest rock bands out there ever. And I'm always wondering about that tension between the fact that we are recording so systemically and so what I would say somewhat artificially almost, and yet the music still has so much energy and life to it. I get to sit on a pretty perch here because I get to ask someone like you who knows from the songwriting part to the playing bass to the actual recording. What's that like now? Because we can listen to these older albums, some of the bands we've mentioned before on vinyl, and we just can't recreate them because it was chaos. Stuff was out of tune. Stuff was out of time. And that's what kind of gave it the vibe.
Yeah. So if I'm, as you're asking me this, I'm processing it. I think what my brain goes to is, you know, what is our job as a musician? What is our job as a songwriter? What is our job as a player? What's my job as a producer, engineer, mixer? My job is to evoke the strongest possible emotion out of the listener, and that's it. Like, and this is something that I think so often gets forgotten these days because everyone's, you know, critical of everyone else's method, right? It's like, well, you're not recording everything analog. We do everything on 2-inch tape, and we do, you know, I'm not saying we do that. I'm speaking for people who have these sort of criticisms, you know, like I record everything to tape and I don't use auto-tune and I don't use beat detective. Well, I do use beat detective and I do use auto-tune, and, you know, so you have these factions that are going back and forth. And I think what gets lost in the middle of this is, are you evoking emotion in the listener? And that's what I always try to pay attention to. I don't have any rules. I don't have any rules about auto-tune. I don't have any rules about beat detective. I don't have any rules about sliding notes around in a session. Does it need to be done in order to evoke the emotion, or is the emotion happening? Does the emotion happen when I listen to this if I grid everything for this particular thing, or does the emotion happen if I don't grid anything? What is it? What's happening? You know, is there a disconnect in what we're trying to get across, or the artist is trying to get across? What's causing that disconnect? Would this help it? You know, is your and I'm speaking as a producer at this point, is your drummer no good? If your drummer's no good, we're probably gonna have to do something to make sure that it's not distracting in order for the emotion to get across. Is your singer great? Is he getting the emotion across? We're probably not gonna have to do much of anything if that's the case. So there are no real rules. Like, there's Shinedown songs out there where there's no auto-tune on anything, and there's Shinedown songs out there where there's auto-tune on everything.
Right.
Singles, you know, the song Planet Zero, like those guttural vocals in those verses, Brent recorded twice and there's no auto-tune on anything, and I didn't have to doctor anything, and I didn't move anything, and it's all just what it is. You know, and then you got a song like 365, which is our latest single, which has more of a pop feel to it, and it's like, yeah, man, I auto-tuned that. It's just what it is, you know. But guess what? It's getting the emotion across, you know. So I don't stick to these rules. I definitely have things that I like to go for. I mean, you're like, I'd love for this. If I'm thinking about some new songs we have coming on the new record, there's one song in particular that, like, there's no auto-tune, there's no beat, there's like nothing. It's just like, there's nothing gridded about it. There's no help in those areas. But man, the song feels really, really great, you know. And then we have other songs where if I took all of those things away from what the final product, it might not do the same thing. It might not strike the same emotion. So that's kind of my criteria for that, is just, what do you need to do to get your idea out there? It's, again, looking at things more from the mindset of a composer rather than being in a band. If that makes sense. It's like, if you know, I think someone who's a composer is just trying to do just that. Like, what do I have? What needs to be done to get this emotion across?
Yeah. So we find ourselves in 2025, and now you are the bass player, and you are all of these other things too. How do you think about tone in terms of the bass? How do you think about it in terms of what it means to the song? And I'm asking this because I'm wondering, because of how musical you are, sometimes when you play the bass, you start hearing things differently. I mean, I know I did. I definitely hear songs differently now than I did when I was younger. So how does that impact it? Because I'm guessing it must shift from being a tool to something that now makes you hear differently.
Yeah, I mean, are you talking tonally, as in like notes that are played, like an overall sense, or like literal tone of the instrument?
I would love to attack both of those, actually.
Yeah, I mean, let's start with tone of the instrument. Again, you know, not coming to the table with something that I consider a tone of my own. Everything is always about the song. In the studio, I'm looking for a bass tone that is going to, I love those bass tones that, if it's a heavy song, I want the bass tone to of course hold down bottom, but be part of the guitar tone. Like, I really like that. What's maybe a frequency that's missing in the guitar that I can distort the bass and have it, you know, really complement the song. Again, the song Planet Zero is a good example of that. The bass tone, you know, kind of fills up this warm mid-range area that the guitar is not filling up, but it has this distortion on it. It's grindy, and it's I think I used the main bass on that whole record is a Thunderbird. So
cool. Wow. Okay.
And I continue to use that Thunderbird in the studio an awful lot, man. I really like the way it sounds. That new 365 is that same Thunderbird, even though the tones are completely different. There's something about that in the studio, that bass, that I just love the way that it sounds. But you know, if you want something to be grindy with the guitars, that's a really good bass for that. You know, but you know, a song like 365 just needs, that's a palm muted, same bass, palm muted with a clean Ampeg sound, you know, and I'm just kind of thumping along, almost as if you put felt under the strings. You know, that's kind of the feel of that. What does the song need? You know, that's tonally is always what I'm going for. Live, I'm going for consistency. What does my sound engineer need to give consistent low end all night long out front to the people?
But very punchy too, Eric. I think that there's something unique in what you bring live, because I did notice that in seeing you live and then watching videos as I was getting ready for this, that there's something really attacking too in it.
Yeah, I mean, so the rig is interesting. I mean, I'm using the SVT 7s. Like, I like their simplicity. I've never been I don't like a lot of knobs. I don't like a lot of options. I like equipment that does one thing really well. I tried the SVT 4 Pros for a while with the graphic EQ and all of this stuff, and it was just, okay, that's too much. It's too much. Let's just give me 3 knobs: bass, treble, mid.
Right. That's me
gain,
too. I'm like
bass, treble, mid, and gain. 4 knobs. You know, and that's my clean tone. Of course, a DI that they're running through some Neve DIs and Neve preamp stuff. Rupert Neve stuff, I think, is what they're using. And then for my dirty channel, I like to do additive things, right? So when I kick on a distortion sound live, that's not coming through my bass rig. That's coming through a separate guitar rig that I have set up. So
Okay.
I've got a Soldano rack mount heads that I'm using, and those go into this 112 ISO cab that I have off to the side of the stage. And by the way, this tour, this record cycle, we've switched over to all ISO cabs. I used to use the SVT cabs, the 410, or sorry, the 810 cabs, 610, 810. I forget what it is. Yeah, 810. That's right. The big SVT cabs. I was using.
I'm less
those.
geary than you, so don't worry. Whatever you say, I can't fact check you on.
The 810 cabs. I was using those for a long time, and then we switched over to ISO cabs now, so everything's isolated. But I like that additive thing, because it's not affecting the low end of my tone. All that is just staying constant, and then the gain channel comes in. It's the same thing I do in the studio with the bass, where everything's parallel processing. So, I'll record, my DI through and then out to an Ampeg just to get a basic bass tone, and then I'll reamp things, for distortion or for maybe a little more mid-range or for a room sound. Like I use room sound on bass sometimes, where it's just like a mic in a room, but it's doing something lovely to the bass. And then I bring those things up in parallel underneath, so I'm not ever affecting the main thing that I've got. I'm just adding to it. And so taking that same mentality into live, that's sort of how I, how I view that. But it's really just about the consistency for Andy Meyer, who's our front of house engineer. And I mean, he's mixed Rage, he's mixed Muse, he's mixed some of these great STP, Justin Timberlake, for that matter. He's well versed on low end and how to make it work and how to make it work well. And so he and I have a great relationship, man. And it's just like, hey, dude, what do I need to give you? And he knows he can come up and tinker with my rig. Like, I don't care. He'll come up and like adjust things. Right. He'll adjust my. At one point, I had a compressor on the front end that I was hitting before I hit anything else. It was coming out of the bass into a compressor just to kind of even things out, because I have a tendency to start digging in pretty hard when I play, on stage when I'm moving around. As much as I would like to think that I can maintain my
subtle nuance.
Yeah, no, it's not. It's not happening. And so at some point he came up and he would adjust, and then eventually he just took it out of the rig. He's like, "Hey, I took your compressor out of the rig." I was like, "Okay," And then Chris Lightcap, who's our monitor engineer, is a wizard, and so he went ahead before I even got to the sound check. He had already made adjustments for me for that. I'm so spoiled. I'm like a spoiled child. But he had already made those adjustments for me, and so Andy can get with my Rem Massengill is my tech, and Andy knows that he can like what needs, because he knows where I stand. It's like, hey man, if something needs to change over here to make that more awesome out there, I can adjust, my end of things. Now, does it take a few days sometimes to get readjusted? Yes, and the growing pains of having that kind of attitude is that, as as a player, is what you're hearing. Because my perception of what a Shinedown show sounds like isn't really what it sounds like. It's just what I'm used to hearing. And so it causes me to play a certain way. If the bass is glued to the drum kit in a nice way, I'm going to play differently than if it sounds separated from the drum kit. And so anytime there's a change like that made in the rig, I have to make sure I can get back to what I'm used to hearing so I can still play, comfortably. But I just, I don't want to be short-sighted. Everything in Shinedown is always about what's best for the band, the benefit of the greater good, however you want to put it. And everybody in our band has to eat shit sandwiches sometimes for that to happen. and we do, and so it's always band first, individual second. So we all kind of view everything like that. It's like, what do I need to do for that show to sound as incredible as it can sound? And so, so that's kind of tonal. When you're talking about that kind of tonal stuff, that's sort of my school of thought is always, I guess if I had to compartmentalize what I said, it's all about taking your ego out of it.
Yeah. Well, this is, and again, I'm going to be respectful because we both have to have a hard stop, but I want I'm really curious about that particular thought in relation to I Had a Name, only because I'm going to assume a couple of things. One is for Shinedown, there is an audience. There is a certain level of who Shinedown is. I mean, the record speaks for itself in terms of the millions of albums and how many singles and all that stuff. But suddenly I'm going to, again, correct me if I'm wrong, assume that when you write this solo album, maybe there isn't an audience in mind finally. Like, that's a very different way for you to think musically. Also, even when you're given a Shinedown song, you're not just thinking about bass lines, you're thinking about production, songwriting, and structure, because now you have a weirder role, which is actually deciding what is quote unquote right for the band as the producer, which is so unique.
Yeah.
So talk a bit about the solo album, because suddenly there isn't an audience necessarily in mind, or is there?
Oh, there was no audience. I was the audience. And that's very liberating. First of all, I have to say this: when Shinedown, when we are writing songs in Shinedown, we are not writing for an audience. We're literally writing for ourselves. The criteria after that, though, is I want every song to be a single in Shinedown.
But somebody must say, like, we have a sound, like people.
Ish. It's very.
Okay.
It's very. We don't constrain ourselves when we're writing Shinedown songs. Like. We're a rock band, right? So we're not gonna jump. You're not gonna get a Justin Timberlake record. You're not gonna get you're gonna get a rock record, but there are gonna be some variations in there, and I think you can hear that on every record where we kind of expand the sandbox that we play in a little bit here or there.
Yeah.
And those things come from a good example is the last song on Planet Zero is a song called "What You Wanted," and it's the first song we wrote for the record. I had just finished I Had a Name. I didn't know what to do with the guitar, so we broke out an iPhone and went into GarageBand Strings and wrote this song on an iPhone, and then recorded the iPhone into an Eve console and like built this song around it. Like I'm not thinking about an audience at that point. I'm thinking about like, this is really cool and different, and I just want to make this a great song. But I am always thinking about like, everything has to be great. Everything has to be Shinedown. Everything has to be great. Everything has to be lyrically tangible. Everything has to be, again, our criteria is no album tracks is usually our criteria. It's like, I don't want any of these to be album tracks. Like if any of these songs could be a single, could they be? Yes. That's sort of our criteria. With I Had a Name, it was, I didn't think at all about singles. That was a liberating thing. Like there was no single. I didn't write a single. I didn't have to write a single. I didn't want to think about writing a single. If the song's 8 minutes long, it's 8 minutes long. If it's 2 minutes long, it's 2 minutes long. If the chorus only happens once, it only happens once, or whatever, And so that was super liberating for me. That was the thing. And I was the audience for that for sure. It's like, I just want to do what I love. And if no one else ever hears this, that's fine. I'm doing this for me. And it almost came to that. I almost didn't release it because I was just kind of happy it existed. And, it had been done for a couple of years before I ever put it out. So that was the thing that I loved. But that also, when it came time to release the record and I'm having these conversations and people at management are like, well, what's the single? Like, I don't know. I never wrote a single. Like I never thought about a single. I just wanted, of course I want to write good songs and things that people can love. And I don't want to go so weird that no one can listen to it, but there was never the thought of writing a single. And honestly, that's if there is something that is and this is going to sound awful, but I don't mean for it to be. If there is something that's tiresome about being in Shinedown, it is always worrying about singles, and you kind of, go back to being a composer, musician, you kind of crave that, like, I just want to make music, man. I just want to make music, whatever that means. And so that was the liberating thing. And then not having to have any other opinions.
Yeah. So last question I'm really curious about is, after everything you've created for yourself, for others, in bands, production, music, whatever it might be, what are some of the things you've learned about, especially being a bass player, I guess, too? What are some of the things you've learned about just being heard?
Goodness gracious. That's an interesting question.
So think about it as I walk through why I'm asking you this.
Yeah.
Because when you're playing bass, you're sitting in a certain perch. When you're recording, it's a different angle. When you're producing, it's a different angle. not many people that I get to speak to, and I've done this a long time, have every angle for it. And so I'm assuming that almost like in a Rick Rubin-esque mindset, you understand what it means for something to truly come out and be heard, because you're not just playing the bass supporting, but you are actually adding.
Yeah, I think, again, man, I'm not going to beat this dead horse, but it does, man. It comes down to removing your ego from the process at all times. And man, it's painful sometimes. I mean, it's like, you know, I have this, oh man, I got this bass run and it's so awesome. Or I've got this guitar part that I love, you know, but it's just not serving the thing. It's not serving the song. Or I've, you know, as a producer engineer, man, I really thought that this big distorted drum sound that's so edgy and cool was going to work in this song, but it's not going to work, you know, and I have to come to terms with the fact that that's not going to work. And that was my favorite thing about the whole thing. But at the end of the day, what's serving the song the best? Again, what I said earlier, the kids don't care. The kids, you know, now, is it important for you to put your personality into things when you can? Yes, absolutely. That's what makes it a band. That's what makes it cool. And there are certain times when it's like, when you do have to look at yourself or your bandmates and look at the fact that they love this thing about a song, and maybe I don't see it, or I'm partial to this thing and I think that I really just like it for me. There are moments of that where you have to be like, okay, hey man, you're not we're not making widgets, you know, we're not stamping out license plates, you know, we're making music, we're making art. And so but in general, it is really that, man. It's you know, how badly do you want to be heard? You know, I mean, do you want, you can want to be heard so badly that you make something that no one can listen to, you know, like you're trying so hard to be an individual that you forget about everything else. You know, I've been heard by now millions of people, maybe I guess billions of people probably at this point, by backing off of that tendency to want to be the look at me thing, you know, look at me, you know. It's and by the way, there is still that thing inside of me that's like, look at me. I think we all have it, but it's you have to kind of humble yourself to the fact of you know, it's our guitar player has a saying, which is, and I don't know where he got it. Maybe it's not original to him, but it's about the painting, not the painter, you know. And so, you know, I have a feeling that when Michelangelo was making his art, he wasn't wanting people to see Michelangelo. He wants people to see the Sistine Chapel or David, right? You know, and so, and I think that if you play your cards right, or you're just honest, how about that? We don't play your cards right because it's not really calculated. But if you're honest, people will see the Sistine Chapel and Michelangelo at the same time. So, you know, maybe in Shinedown we've been able to accomplish that, where, you know, people love the songs and they love the music, which is the primary goal. But at the same time, when they hear those things, they equate them with Eric Bass, Zach Myers, Barry Kirch, and Brent Smith. You know?
There's a lot going on. You've got the new solo album, I Had a Name. There's, I think right now, 2 songs from Shinedown, new ones. There's 365 and Dance Kid Dance,
yep,
which is leading up to the 8th album, and you're currently on tour. What have I missed? What's coming in the next couple months? When is that 8th album? What do we know?
Yeah, so we thought this is the most Shinedown thing ever. You know, we'd written a bunch of songs. We've probably got, I forget how many we've got, like already in the can, like completed. And we thought we were well on our way to having the record done and it would be out soon, like this year. And, you know, and then we had to kind of take a look at each other about a month ago, 2 months ago. I was like, hey, do we really have a great record here? Or is it just, we're just trying to have a great record so we can get back on a tour and put a record out? And I think we kind of came to our senses with, we got a few more songs to write probably that we don't have yet. We've got some great stuff, but for us, it's every record's your first record. You know, there's no like never resting on your laurels. You know, you can't just go, oh, let's put a record out there so we can get back out on tour. It's like, that's not what it is. So we decided to release the 2 songs that we had and also do something that a rock band hasn't done in a long, maybe ever, or in a long time, which is to release 2 different songs at different formats on radio all at one time.
Right.
And so we have these 2 songs. We're going to release a couple more before the end of the year. I got to get home and get to work on those mixes for sure. But those songs are done. And then, but while all of that's going on, we're going to be doing some more writing and some more recording. And I think that this might be the scoop. This might be the first time I've mentioned it, but I think the record will probably not be out this year, which we said it would be, or we said in multiple interviews that we'll have the record out this year. But it's purely out of a sense of realizing that we were maybe trying to rush something that we shouldn't rush. And if we want to make the best record of our career, which is how we view every record we go into, then we need to kind of put our nose to the grindstone a little more. So there's a lot of work to do. So when I get off tour here, I think we have 3 shows left in this first run. I'm gonna go home and start that process, and then we'll have the second leg of the tour, and then we get done with that. We'll finish the process and get the record out early next year, probably.
That's great. Well, Eric, I can't thank you enough for your time. It's such a pleasure talking with you.
Mitch, it was nice to talk to you as well, man. Thank you.